I'm Marin, 31, and the night my father's 60th birthday dinner was set to begin, the host draped a linen napkin across my lap as if that could smooth what waited in the room. The crystal chimed. The candles flickered, and my name passed around the table like a rumor. I placed a hand on the bouquet box I'd brought white lilies and pale roses I'd arranged myself before closing my shop, and told myself to breathe. Savannah moved through the restaurant like a headliner, her laughter landing before she did, and Lily kept pace a step behind, nodding at jokes I couldn't hear. My father accepted air kisses and handshakes, as if this were a stage he'd owned for years, and maybe he had. I could feel the old distance settling in the one that made me shrink without anyone asking. The waiter poured wine I didn't plan to drink. A violinist tuned a soft C. Across the table, Savannah lifted her glass and watched me over the rim, smiling, as if a cue had been given. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever been the quiet one in a loud room, tap like and subscribe, so this story finds the folks who need it. I run a flower shop on a corner that catches the morning light, the kind that warms the sidewalk even in winter. It isn't fancy, and some weeks my fingers ache from wiring stems and hauling buckets, but the work steadies me. I grew up learning that small, careful things mattered. Hold the door, send a thank you note. Look people in the eye. My mother taught those things before she passed, and I stuck to them after, even when the rest of the family moved faster and louder. Dad prized big wins and bold pitches. He liked a plan that sounded impressive when told over coffee with old friends. Savannah learned that language early, and Lily, eager to keep the peace, followed along. I learned patience, and how to get up before dawn to bid on fresh stock, and how to save a little from each week, because there was no one waiting to cover the shortfalls. The gap between our worlds showed up in little ways first. When Dad visited the shop, he'd run a thumb over a rose petal and say, "You've got a good eye, kiddo," then ask Savannah how her latest campaign was tracking. At holidays, she brought charts and mock-ups. I brought centerpieces. The year she launched her boutique line, she booked a space off Magazine Street with mirrors that made everything look more expensive, and I sent blooms that matched her brand palette because that was what I could do. She called me generous, then told the investors the flowers were from a wonderful local vendor without saying my name. In our house, ambition floated to the top like cream. Craft sank without complaint. I supplied the bouquets, she supplied the storyline, and Dad kept count of the applause. Kindness is quieter than profit, and I think that's why it was easy to overlook. My days were measured in deliveries and handwritten cards tucked into brown paper, not followers or press mentions. But I was proud of what I built. I liked being the woman the brides trusted, the neighbor who sent a small bunch to a widow on a hard morning. I liked locking the door each evening, knowing the floor was swept and the invoices were paid. I chose steady over showy, and most days that choice felt right. It was only when I stepped into rooms like the one at my father's dinner that the old doubt crowded in, reminding me who got introduced first and whose work counted as a real business. I said yes to the dinner because my father asked, and because a daughter says yes, even when she knows the seating chart won't favor her. He liked to set the scene: a long table, polished silver, a place where he could feel surrounded by success. Savannah offered to plan the night, and of course she did it beautifully. Place cards with gold edges, a jazz trio slipping standards between courses, a custom menu printed on cardstock that matched her brand colors better than it matched my father's tie. I had spent an hour arranging his gift, those lilies and roses, in a low, sturdy vase he could take home and set on the piano, the same one I learned to play on when I was 10. He took the arrangement with his careful, distant smile, then set it behind him where the servers staged the next course. Savannah's present, a leather briefcase with his initials, drew a cheer. There are truths you don't say aloud in families like ours. One is that attention is a currency, and some of us are always in debt. Another is that loyalty can be a kind of habit, one you keep even after it stops giving back. I'd learned to be useful. I'd learned to keep my voice warm and my spine straight even when I wanted to leave the room. But usefulness has a way of turning invisible, and that night it felt like I could disappear, and no one would notice until it was time to clear the plates. Savannah told a story about a pop-up she was launching, and glanced at me only when the punchline landed, as if to check whether I'd laugh on cue. Lily touched my wrist and asked about the shop, then drifted back to Cole when he signaled her over with a look. Dad kept the conversation moving like a conductor never missing a beat. The small differences, who gets praised, who gets passed over, stack up until they become a divide you can't cross with a polite smile. I felt that divide then, sitting with my napkin folded just so, listening to the soft clatter of forks and the rise and fall of easy voices. It wasn't jealousy. It was the simple recognition that I wasn't part of the picture my father liked to paint. I had come with a good heart and a careful gift, and the hope that maybe we could share a table without measuring each other. The hope thinned as the night wore on. The violinist eased into a tune my mother loved, and for a second the room softened. Across the stemware and the glow of the candles, Savannah lifted her glass and caught my eye. Her smile sharpened just enough to register, like a light turned up one notch too bright. Dad leaned back to make room for the server and nodded to the guests at the far end. The trio paused between songs. Lily's hand stilled on her napkin. Savannah tipped the bowl of her glass a fraction enough to make the surface ripple and set it down again as if nothing had happened. I sat up a little straighter, feeling the room tilt with it, and understood we were about to stop pretending. The music dipped between courses the way it does when everyone's attention starts to wander. My father leaned toward Savannah, whispering something that made her laugh too loud, and for a brief moment I thought the evening might settle into an uneasy peace. Then, in one quick motion, she stood. Her wineglass caught the light from the chandelier, and she lifted it high like she was about to make a toast. The room fell quiet. I remember the faint hum of the jazz trio in the corner, the smell of garlic butter drifting from the kitchen, and the stillness right before it happened. Savannah turned her wrist, and the red wine arced through the air like a ribbon splattering across my dress and the linen napkin in my lap. It soaked in fast warm at first, then cold. The sound that followed wasn't surprise. It was laughter, sharp knowing practiced. My father didn't say a word. Cole leaned back with a grin, and even Lily's nervous chuckle joined the mix. "You don't belong to this family," Savannah said, her voice bright and cruel, like she was performing for an audience that had already decided its applause. My skin prickled. My throat tightened, but I didn't give them the reaction they wanted. I set down my fork, picked up the napkin, and dabbed at the stain until the fabric bled pink. The room kept laughing, but the noise grew distant. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the tile, and stood. "Excuse me," I said quietly, not to anyone in particular. The hallway outside the restaurant was cooler than I expected. I could still hear them behind me, that chorus of mockery that had chased me through too many years. I walked out into the night, the air thick with humidity, the city lights blurring in the sheen of my eyes. I made it to my car before the tears came, not the kind that burn, just the kind that fall because you're too tired to stop them. I sat there, hands on the wheel, the faint scent of lilies still clinging to my jacket from the bouquet I'd made for my father. The streets hummed with Friday night traffic. Somewhere down the block, a couple laughed too loudly, a sound that reminded me how small I felt at that table. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I slipped off my heels, peeled the ruined dress from my skin, and let it fall into the laundry basket. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the humiliation or the predictability of it. I'd seen versions of that moment before, smaller ones, the sideways glances, the inside jokes that left me out. But tonight, it had gone further, and something inside me had gone quiet in response. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen until my reflection blurred. My inbox was open to the email thread with Savannah's company contracts, wire receipts, progress reports that never matched the promises she made. $10,000 of my savings had gone into that business because she said it would bring us closer, because she said it was family. I scrolled through her words, the ones that once sounded hopeful, but now read like a script she'd used before. "You'll have full transparency," she'd written. "You'll see returns within the first year." That was 3 years ago. I'd never seen a single check. I hovered over the folder where I'd saved everything, copies of transfers, the signed agreement with my name printed neatly at the bottom. My finger lingered over the mouse. It wasn't anger that moved me, it was something steadier. I opened a new message, typed out a short notice, and ended my involvement with her company in one clean line. The sound of the send key echoed in the quiet apartment, soft but final. For a long while I sat there listening to the refrigerator hum. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. I wasn't sure if I felt relief or grief, maybe both. I had spent years trying to hold my place in a family that treated loyalty like currency, but never paid it back. Tonight had only clarified what I already knew. Savannah didn't see me as a sister, she saw me as her safety net. And Dad, well, he saw what he wanted to see. I closed the laptop, poured myself a glass of water, and took slow sips until the knot in my chest loosened. Sleep didn't come easy. I replayed the dinner in flashes the way Savannah's lipstick didn't smudge when she smiled, the faint tap of Dad's ring against his glass, the shimmer of wine on the tablecloth. Every detail etched itself deeper. By dawn, I'd already decided that none of it would follow me into the new day. I pulled on jeans, tied my hair up, and went downstairs to open the shop early. The smell of soil and fresh stems grounded me. It always did. The first delivery arrived at 7 buckets of sunflowers and carnations, their colors defiant against the gray light. I arranged them in the window, took a breath, and reminded myself that I had work to do. Around noon, a sharp knock rattled the shop door. I turned, wiping my hands on my apron. Through the glass stood Cole Savannah's husband, still in his pressed shirt from the night before. His expression was clipped, his jaw tight the way a man looks when he's here for business, not apology. I unlocked the door, but didn't invite him in. "We need to talk," he said. His tone was cold, stripped of pretense. "Savannah's business can't move forward without your support. You need to reinstate that contract." I folded my arms. "You came all this way to talk about money." He shifted his eyes, darting past me toward the register. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "You're sabotaging more than just her work. You're hurting your own family." I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my voice calm. "After last night, I don't owe anyone an explanation." He opened his mouth again, but I closed the door before he could finish. His reflection lingered in the glass, distorted by the midday glare, and then he turned and walked away. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty street, the kind of silence that hums when something has just ended for good. Inside the shop smelled of lilacs and fresh greenery. The hum of the cooler filled the space again. I picked up the pruning shears and went back to trimming stems. That night I couldn't shake a restless feeling. The encounter had stirred something, a sense that this wasn't finished, that Savannah wouldn't let it end cleanly. I checked the front locks twice, then sat on the couch scrolling through the store's security app. The feed loaded, and for a moment everything looked normal. Then the timestamp jumped to 2:03 a.m. I watched as 2 figures appeared on the screen, one tall, one shorter, both in hooded jackets. My pulse quickened as I recognized the way the smaller one moved a tilt of the head I'd seen my entire life. Savannah. They carried cans of red spray paint, the color bleeding under the streetlights. The words formed "Fast Fraud Liar" scrawled in thick letters across my windows. The taller figure hurled a brick and glass shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. They dumped bags of trash into the flower beds, food rotting and paper fluttering in the wind. I watched the footage twice before the reality set in. My shop, the place I built with every bit of care I had, was under attack by my own sister. I sat frozen, the only sound the faint buzz of my phone still recording. When the sun rose, I drove straight to the shop. The red paint screamed from the walls, the broken glass crunched under my shoes, and the air smelled like decay. A neighbor sweeping her porch looked up as I parked. "Saw 2 people running off last night," she said, shaking her head. "Didn't catch their faces." I nodded, too focused to speak. I took photos of everything, the shattered display, the smeared words, the ruined blooms half buried under garbage. The damage wasn't just vandalism, it was personal. I could see it in every deliberate swing of that brick. By the time I finished documenting it all, my hands had stopped trembling. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Daniel Fry's number. He'd helped me years ago with a lease dispute, a man who never wasted words. "I need your advice," I said when he answered. "Something serious." I sent him the footage and photos. Within an hour, he called back, his tone measured but firm. "This is clear-cut vandalism," he said, "and given the connection, it could tie directly to your financial withdrawal. You should file a lawsuit." Standing there amid the wreckage, I agreed without hesitation. "Do it," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Daniel promised to start the paperwork right away. As I hung up, I glanced through the broken window at the bouquet that somehow survived a handful of daisies still upright in a cracked vase. I reached for them, brushed off a fleck of red paint, and thought about everything that had just begun. The afternoon sun crept across the ruined floor, and the sound of traffic filled the space again. Normal life moving past what felt like the edge of mine. I locked the door behind me, the metal scraping louder than usual. The fight had started whether Savannah realized it or not, and there was no turning back. When I pulled up to the shop the next morning, the air still smelled faintly of paint and spoiled food. The cleanup crew had finished boarding the broken windows, but the damage was impossible to hide. A few curious neighbors lingered across the street, whispering under their breath as they passed. Inside, the silence felt heavy, interrupted only by the crunch of glass under my shoes. I moved slowly through the aisles, picking up what I could: flower pots, overturned stems, crushed petals, scattered like confetti after a storm. My phone buzzed against the counter, and Daniel's name appeared on the screen. "Morning," he said. I filed the initial claim. "We'll start with property damage and add more if new evidence comes up." His voice carried the kind of calm that steadied me. I looked around the wreckage and told him I'd already taken photographs. "Good," he said. "Keep everything documented. Even small details matter." He promised to call again once he had a court date. After hanging up, I walked outside, the bright sun glinting off the shop's boarded facade. A woman from the cafe next door waved at me holding a broom. "Heard what happened," she said softly. "You let me know if you need anything." I thanked her and kept sweeping, trying not to think about how the neighborhood had become my quiet witness. By noon, I'd bagged the last of the ruined flowers and set the broom against the wall. For the first time in a long while, I felt something shift, a slow burn of resolve beneath the weariness. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Lily. Heard about the shop. Was it really Savannah? I stared at the screen before typing back, "I've got security footage. It's clear." Her reply came almost instantly. "That doesn't sound like her. Or maybe it does." The words lingered on the screen like hesitation given shape. It was the first time she'd ever questioned Savannah out loud. I didn't press her, but the doubt in her message felt like the first crack in a wall that had stood for years. 2 days later, I drove downtown to meet Daniel in person. His office was tucked above an old bakery that smelled faintly of sugar and yeast. He greeted me with a firm handshake and gestured toward the stack of papers on his desk. "This is the full suit," he said. "We're asking for $10,000 in damages and costs for lost business during repairs." I scanned the pages carefully before signing. My name looked different this time, not the signature of someone asking for permission, but someone drawing a boundary. "She'll be served tomorrow," he said. "It's a strong case, Marin." On my way out, I caught a glimpse of the courthouse across the street, its stone steps glinting in the sun. I had walked past it hundreds of times without thinking much about what it represented. Today it felt like a line between my old life and something new. As I reached my car, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Marin?" A woman's voice asked, trembling slightly, "My name's Megan Hart. I used to work for Savannah." The name didn't ring a bell. Her voice dropped lower. "I know what she did to your shop. I have documents that show she's done worse." She explained quickly how she'd been a manager at Savannah's company until last year, how she'd found forged invoices and a loan taken in my name. "She said you agreed to it," Megan whispered, "but I knew that wasn't true. She promised to email the copies that night." I wrote down her number and thanked her before she hung up. When the email arrived, I opened it on my kitchen table. There were scanned receipts, fake invoices with my name and signature pasted neatly across the bottom, and a loan agreement showing $20,000 borrowed in my name. My stomach twisted. She hadn't just humiliated me, she'd stolen from me. I forwarded everything to Daniel with one line, "We need to add this to the case." Not long after, a knock sounded at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Lily stood there, her face pale and uncertain. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I nodded and stepped aside. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped. Savannah told me not to say anything. She began, her voice barely above a whisper. She said it was for the good of the family. "But after what she did to your shop, I can't defend her anymore." She lifted her eyes to mine. and for the first time they didn't carry that same old guilt. "I'm on your side now, Marin. What she did was wrong." I didn't know what to say at first. Years of tension between us hung in the air. Finally I said, "Thank you." It was enough. She nodded, and we sat in quiet understanding. When she left, I forwarded Megan's files to Daniel. Within an hour, he called. "This changes everything," he said. "We're amending the lawsuit. Forgery, unauthorized loans, possible fraud." His voice sharpened. "This could lead to criminal charges if the court wants to pursue them." I told him to move ahead. "All of it," I said. "I want her held accountable." The next morning, he filed the amendment. By evening, my phone buzzed again, this time a message from Cole. "You're making a mistake. Drop this or you'll regret it." I stared at the screen unmoved, then typed back, "Threats won't change the truth." I hit send and blocked his number. My hands were steady. The community started whispering soon after. A vendor from the French market called to say she'd overheard talk of Savannah's company being in trouble. A florist friend from uptown mentioned hearing words like reckless and fraudulent floating around local supplier meetings. Even Savannah's social media presence began to quiet. The constant stream of curated success stories slowed to nothing. It wasn't revenge that filled the silence. It was accountability finding its way through. That night I locked up the shop and walked home under the glow of the streetlights. My reflection followed me in the darkened windows, tired but steady. The air was cooler than usual for New Orleans, with a hint of rain coming in from the river. I passed a group of students laughing outside a coffee shop, the sound light and unguarded. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. The next day, Daniel called to say Savannah had been served. Her reaction came sooner than I expected. Late that afternoon, she appeared at my door, her expression stripped of the polish she wore so easily in public. Her eyes were red, her voice shaky. "Marin, please," she said. "Can we talk just once for the sake of Dad and Lily? Drop the lawsuit. We can fix this." She reached for my hand, but I didn't move. Her perfume carried the same note as the night of the dinner, sweet, heavy, familiar. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Sorry," I said evenly. "I don't welcome strangers." The words landed between us like a mirror reflecting the cruelty she'd once thrown at me. She blinked, her mouth parting as if to respond, but I shut the door gently before she could. The lock clicked into place, quiet but final. Later that night, I sat at the table with a cup of tea that had gone cold, staring at the muted glow of the city outside. I thought about how quickly the lines between family and enemy had blurred, how years of loyalty could dissolve in a single act of truth. My phone buzzed again, a notification from a friend at the market. "Savannah posted something about you online," the message read. I opened the link and saw her public statement, a long post accusing me of betrayal, claiming I'd fabricated everything to destroy her company. She called me a family wrecker and urged people to pray for forgiveness. The comments were already piling up. Some people took her side, but others questioned her version. "This doesn't sound like Marin," one person wrote. "There's more to this story." I scrolled through them until the screen blurred. I took a screenshot and sent it to Daniel. His reply came minutes later. "This qualifies as defamation," he wrote. "We'll add it to the lawsuit tomorrow." Outside, the rain finally started. It tapped softly against the window, steady and calm. I set the phone down, listening to the sound of it, thinking about how fragile and strong truth can be at the same time. Savannah's world was unraveling one thread at a time, and for the first time I didn't feel small in her shadow. When the thunder rolled in, I closed the curtains and stood for a moment, breathing in the quiet. Tomorrow would bring more noise calls, paperwork, court dates, but for now the city's rhythm was enough. The rain washed against the sidewalks, clearing away the dust and paint from the past week. I let it fall, knowing the storm wasn't over yet, but the air finally smelled like something new was beginning. The following week began quietly, though the quiet never felt safe. The morning after Savannah's post, I opened the shop early, half expecting someone to show up asking questions. Instead, customers came as usual, one woman picking out daisies for a friend, a young man choosing roses for an anniversary, and each transaction reminded me that life somehow continued. Still, there was a tension underneath it all. My phone stayed on the counter, buzzing every few minutes with notifications from social media. The story was spreading faster than I could read it. By noon, a local vendor texted me a screenshot from a neighborhood page. Savannah's post had been shared dozens of times, mostly by people who knew us only in passing. Some comments defended her, calling her driven misunderstood. Others asked questions she didn't answer. A few names I recognized from the market were beginning to doubt her version. "Doesn't sound like Marin," one wrote. "She's too steady for that." Another added, "If it's true, why delete her old posts?" The tide was shifting, and not in Savannah's favor. When Daniel called later that afternoon, his tone was firm. "This strengthens our case," he said. "Defamation isn't just talk. It's written proof of intent to damage your name. We'll include it." I could hear him flipping through papers on his desk, the sound of professionalism I had come to rely on. "Once it's filed," he continued, "she'll realize the post did more harm than good." I thanked him and hung up, watching the sunlight fade across the display window. Outside, people walked by with coffee cups and shopping bags, unaware of how much weight one public lie could carry. That evening, I locked up early and took the long way home, past the old fountain on Chartres Street, where my mother used to take us when we were little. The water still flowed, though the stone was chipped in places. I sat for a while, letting the sound of it fill the space where words didn't fit. Somewhere in that quiet, I found a strange calm. I had spent years swallowing humiliation to keep peace. Now I was learning what peace actually cost. 2 days later, Daniel asked me to stop by his office. When I arrived, he had the printed amendment-ready defamation, fraud, and property damage all bound in one thick stack. "This isn't small anymore," he said, sliding the papers toward me. "It's the kind of case that changes how people are seen." His expression softened. "Are you ready for that?" I nodded. "I've been ready longer than I realized." I signed where he pointed the pen, moving with more certainty than it had a month ago. On my way out, I noticed a woman waiting in the lobby. She looked vaguely familiar until she stood and gave me a hesitant smile. "You're Marin, right?" she asked. "I'm Megan Hart. We spoke on the phone." She looked younger than her voice had sounded, nervous but determined. "I just wanted to tell you in person that you're doing the right thing," she said. "When I worked for Savannah, I saw what she was capable of. People stayed quiet because they needed their jobs." I thanked her, feeling the weight of her words settle like a truth I hadn't fully allowed myself to believe. Later that night, the phone rang again, this time with a number I knew by heart. I hesitated before answering. "Marin," my father's voice said, calm but clipped. "I heard what's happening. Can we meet?" The last time we'd spoken, he'd barely looked at me across the dinner table. "What for?" I asked. "To talk sense into you," he said, as if that still worked. "This lawsuit's making the family look bad. Savannah's suffering enough." I felt the familiar pressure in my chest, the one that came every time he called me the problem. "Dad," I said, steadying my voice. "She's not the one who lost her livelihood. I am." There was a pause, then a sigh. "You always make things bigger than they need to be." Before I could respond, he hung up. The call left a dull ache behind one I carried into the next morning. At the shop, Lily stopped by unannounced, her arms full of takeout boxes. "I brought lunch," she said, setting them down. "You look like you could use it." We ate in silence for a bit, the smell of sesame noodles filling the small space. Finally, she spoke. "Dad's been calling me," she said softly. "He's upset, but I told him he needs to stop blaming you." Savannah did this to herself. Her voice wavered, but she didn't look away. He didn't like hearing that. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm glad you said it," she nodded. "I just don't want to lose everyone," she whispered. "You won't," I said quietly. "Not everyone deserves to be kept." The words surprised me as much as they did her, but neither of us took them back. That evening, as I was closing up, a man from the local newspaper stopped by. "We're running a piece on small businesses recovering from vandalism," he said. "Mind if I ask a few questions?" His tone was polite, curious, not probing. I agreed, giving simple answers. What happened, how the community helped, how the shop was doing now. I didn't mention Savannah by name. The next morning, the article appeared online, a small feature tucked between local stories. The headline read, "Florist Rebuilds After Setback Finds Support in Neighbors." It was enough to change the conversation. Messages started coming in from customers and even strangers, people offering encouragement, sharing their own stories of starting over. A man I'd met once at a trade fair sent a note saying he admired how I handled myself. "You didn't throw stones back," he wrote. "You just stood your ground." For the first time since the dinner, I felt seen for something other than endurance, but the calm didn't last long. Late that afternoon, Daniel called again. "Savannah's attorney reached out," he said. "They're trying to negotiate before the hearing." My heart sank not from fear but from exhaustion. "What do they want?" I asked. "To settle quietly," he said. "No admission of guilt, just financial restitution and a confidentiality clause." I looked out the window at the street below the people walking by with their own worries unaware of mine. "No," I said finally. "We're not hiding this." Daniel was quiet for a moment before saying, "Then we move forward." When I hung up, I caught my reflection in the glass, tired but steady, the same woman who'd once sat silent at a table while her sister laughed. That version of me felt far away now. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, the shop lights cast a warm glow across the flowers in the front display. A customer lingered outside reading the new sign I'd placed in the window, "Open and Growing." The paint was barely dry, the words simple but true. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the cool evening air. The lawsuit was growing into something larger than either of us had planned. Tomorrow, there would be lawyers' hearings, maybe even reporters. But as I walked toward my car, I realized I wasn't walking toward a fight anymore. I was walking toward freedom. The kind that doesn't ask permission, the kind that finally breathes on its own. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the corner cafe. Somewhere behind me, the boarded window of the shop rattled, but I didn't turn back. Ahead, the city lights stretched wide and bright, and I followed them home knowing the hardest part was still to come. The following morning, Daniel called with an update. His voice carried a quiet energy I'd come to recognize, measured but certain. "We've got a preliminary hearing date," he said. 2 weeks from now." I nodded, gripping the edge of the counter as I listened. "That'll move things fast," he added. I told him I'd be ready. When the call ended, I stood for a long moment looking around the shop. Sunlight spilled across the front display, warming the petals of the morning deliveries. It was peaceful, almost deceptively so, like the world had no idea what was about to unfold. That afternoon, I drove across town to replace the last of the damaged glass panes. The repairman, a gray-haired man named Vince, worked carefully, sealing each edge with practiced precision. "Shame what happened here," he said quietly, glancing at the fading spray paint that still marked one side wall. "I see plenty of petty stuff, but this was personal." I didn't correct him. The truth didn't need words that day. By the time he finished, the reflection in the window was whole again, though the memory behind it remained cracked. Back at home, I found a voicemail waiting from my father. His tone was clipped, the way it always was when disappointment edged his words. "Marin, your sister's falling apart," he said. "She can't sleep, she's getting hate messages, her investors are pulling back. This lawsuit is destroying her reputation and our family's name. I'm asking you to reconsider before this goes too far." He paused, then added, "You've made your point." The message ended, leaving the familiar hollowness in its wake. I deleted it without saving. 2 days later, the rain returned. I arrived at the shop early to find Lily already inside, unlocking the back door with the spare key I'd given her weeks before. "Thought I'd help you restock," she said, setting her bag on the counter. Her hair was damp from the drizzle, her cheeks pink from the cold. We worked in silence for a while, trimming stems and refilling vases. Finally, she spoke. "Dad's been calling non-stop," she said. "He's angry, but not at Savannah. He keeps saying you're making her suffer." I looked up from the roses I was arranging. "And what do you think?" She hesitated. "I think you're the only one finally holding her accountable." Her voice carried a quiet strength I hadn't heard before. For years, Lily had lived in Savannah's shadow, her choices shaped by what kept the peace. But something had shifted in her. When she left later that morning, she hugged me for the first time in months. "You're stronger than she ever expected," she said softly. I stood there after she left, the scent of fresh-cut lilies filling the air, realizing that small moments like that meant more than any apology I might ever get from our father. By the end of the week, Daniel called again with an update. Savannah's team filed a motion to delay the hearing, he said. They're claiming new evidence, but I think it's just a stall tactic. I sighed, pacing near the front window. What happens if they succeed? I asked. Then we wait, he said. But judges don't like games. This might work against them. His voice softened. You've done everything right, Marin. Stay steady. That night I poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window watching the rain streak down the glass. The city outside looked blurred, softened by the drizzle. Somewhere in the distance a streetcar bell chimed. I thought of all the times I'd stayed silent, choosing family harmony over self-respect. This time silence wasn't an option. I picked up my phone and scrolled through photos of the shop before and after the damage. The contrast told the story better than words ever could. A few evenings later, a knock echoed through the apartment. I checked the peephole and froze. Savannah stood there again, her shoulders tense, makeup faintly smudged. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. What now? I asked. Her voice wavered. Dad's sick about this. He won't eat, won't sleep. You're tearing this family apart. I didn't answer right away. You did that, I said finally. She flinched, then tried to compose herself. Please, she said, lowering her tone. Drop the case and I'll pay you back everything, even more if you want. Just stop. I studied her for a moment. For the first time she looked small, her usual confidence gone. You had years to make things right, I said quietly. Now it's the court's turn. Her expression hardened, and without another word she turned and walked down the hall, the sound of her heels fading until there was only silence again. I leaned against the door, the weight of the exchange pressing against my chest. But beneath it, there was clarity. The line between us had been drawn, and no plea could erase it. The following morning, Daniel emailed me the revised court schedule. The judge denied their delay, he wrote. Hearing stands for next Monday. I exhaled the relief, quiet but deep. The weekend passed in slow motion. I spent most of it at the shop catching up on orders and talking with customers who came by to show support. A woman named Clara, who ran the bakery down the street, stopped in with a box of muffins. Everyone's behind you, she said, pressing the box into my hands. We've seen what you've been through. Her kindness carried me through the long hours that followed. On Sunday night, I walked through the shop one last time before closing. The flowers in the front display, roses, tulips, and baby's breath stood tall under the soft glow of the overhead lights. I adjusted one vase, took a step back, and whispered to the empty room, almost there. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and clear. I dressed simply, a navy dress, black coat, and the silver necklace my mother had given me years ago. When I reached the courthouse, Daniel was waiting near the steps, briefcase in hand. You ready? He asked. As I'll ever be, I said. Inside, the air was crisp, the hallways echoing with footsteps and distant voices. Savannah and Cole were already seated across the room, their expressions unreadable. My father wasn't there. Neither was Lily. I chose to see that as her quiet way of showing support. When the proceedings began, Daniel's voice carried a steady rhythm. He presented the footage, the forged documents, the vandalism reports, and finally screenshots of the defamatory post. Savannah's lawyer tried to argue it was all misunderstanding, but each piece of evidence built a clearer picture. Savannah avoided my gaze, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The judge listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes. Hours passed before the hearing adjourned for the day. As I stepped outside, the afternoon sun cut through the clouds, bright and sharp. Daniel fell into step beside me. You did well, he said. They're scrambling, and it shows. I nodded, exhausted but steady. Across the street, a vendor was selling bouquets from a cart, their colors vivid against the gray sidewalk. I bought one without thinking, a bundle of white daisies, and carried it home. That night I set the flowers in a vase by the window and watched the city lights flicker against the glass. The day had been long, but it had moved something forward. Savannah's silence in court had said more than any apology could. The truth was no longer mine alone to carry. It was written, documented, undeniable. As the city settled into the quiet hum of evening, I felt the tension ease for the first time in weeks. The next step would come soon, the verdict, the fallout, whatever came after. But for now, the fight was no longer about family or approval. It was about closure. And as I turned off the lights and let the soft scent of daisies fill the room, I knew the hardest part had already passed. The second day in court felt longer than the first. The morning light filtered through the high windows, casting narrow bands of gold across the polished floor. I took my seat beside Daniel, my notes neatly stacked, though I barely glanced at them. Savannah sat across the aisle, her hair pulled back too tightly, her gaze fixed on the table in front of her. Cole leaned close to whisper something, but she didn't respond. When the judge entered the room, rose, and for a brief second everything went still. The tension, the whispers, even the sound of shuffling papers. Daniel began with quiet confidence, walking the court through the trail of evidence that connected the forged documents and vandalism back to Savannah. He didn't raise his voice, didn't dramatize. He just let the facts settle one by one, each stronger than the last. Savannah's lawyer countered with half-hearted arguments, claiming miscommunication and family misunderstanding. But when Daniel displayed the security footage on the screen, the air shifted. The image of Savannah and Cole outside my shop, spray cans in hand, froze the courtroom in silence. I could feel every breath drawn at once, like the room itself had stopped to watch. The judge leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. Savannah wouldn't look up. Her fingers twisted the hem of her jacket, her knuckles white. I sat quietly, my palms pressed together on the table, reminding myself to breathe evenly. For months I had imagined this moment, but it felt different, less like victory, more like closure, trying to find its way through the noise. When the session adjourned for lunch, I stepped outside to clear my head. The courtyard was bright sunlight reflecting off the marble steps. I sat on a bench beneath a magnolia tree, its blossoms beginning to fall in slow spirals. A woman from the market passed by and recognized me. "You're the florist from Royal Street," she said. "I saw your story online. Good for you for standing up." Her words were simple, but they grounded me. Back inside, the proceedings resumed with witness testimony. Megan Hart was called to the stand. She looked nervous at first, her hands clasped together tightly, but her voice steadied as she began. She described working for Savannah, the long hours, the sudden financial gaps, the orders that didn't match invoices. When Daniel asked about the forged documents, she opened a folder and produced printed copies of the originals. "She used Marin's name," Megan said quietly. "She said no one would question it if it came from family. Savannah's attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she was a disgruntled ex-employee. Megan didn't flinch. "I didn't leave because of pay," she said. "I left because she crossed a line." Her calmness filled the room in a way anger never could. The judge nodded slightly, taking notes. I caught Megan's eye as she stepped down, offering a small nod of gratitude. She returned it with a faint, reassuring smile. By late afternoon, the hearing was nearly over. Daniel closed with a brief summary, measured firm and clear. He spoke of responsibility, trust, and the cost of deception when it happens within a family. Savannah's lawyer gave his final statement, his tone weary, his words less confident than the day before. When the judge dismissed us for the day, I knew the verdict was already forming in her mind. Outside, the wind had picked up sweeping leaves across the courthouse steps. Daniel stood beside me as we watched the sky deepen toward dusk. "You did well," he said. "Whatever happens, you showed integrity. That matters." I nodded, too drained to say much more. "We'll have the decision by next week," he added. "Try to rest until then." That evening I walked home instead of driving. The streets glowed under the amber light of the street lamps, the rhythm of the city slower than usual. I passed the bakery closed for the night, and the faint smell of sugar still lingered in the air. By the time I reached my apartment, the exhaustion had caught up with me. I set my phone on the counter and stood for a long moment listening to the quiet. It was the kind of silence that came after a long storm, not empty, but calm. 3 days later, Daniel called. His voice carried a steady weight. "We got the ruling," he said. My stomach tightened. The court found Savannah and Cole liable for damages, fraud, and defamation. They're ordered to pay $25,000 in restitution. I exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible. "It's done," I asked. "It's done," he said. "And it's binding." For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he added, "She's going to face more fallout than just this. The judgment will follow her business records. Investors will see it. You don't need to say another word." I thanked him, my voice quiet but sure. That night, I didn't celebrate. I simply walked to the window and looked down at the street below the rain, beginning again in soft, steady lines. Somewhere across town, Savannah was facing the same sound, the same sky, the same storm, but from a place she had built on her own choices. The thought didn't bring satisfaction, just peace. The next morning, the first call came from the bank confirming that restitution would be processed through the court. By afternoon, the neighborhood had already heard. A vendor I knew from the flower market sent a brief message, "Justice finally blooms." I smiled faintly at the choice of words. It felt fitting. 2 days later, Lily appeared at the shop, her face lighter than I'd seen in months. "I heard the news," she said, stepping behind the counter. "Congratulations." I shook my head. "It's not about that." She nodded, understanding. "Still," she said softly, "you did what none of us could." She reached for a bundle of fresh lilies and began trimming the stems. "Dad called," she added. "He's quiet. I think he finally sees what Savannah did." I didn't ask for details. Some truths didn't need to be spoken aloud anymore. We worked side by side, the rhythm of scissors and water filling the space between us. The shop felt alive again, bright, fragrant, and whole. That weekend, the story made its way into the local business section. The headline was small but unmistakable: "Boutique Startup Faces Fraud Ruling After Family Dispute." The article didn't mention my name until the final paragraph, and even then it focused on the restoration of my flower shop. Still, it spread quietly through the community, changing how people looked at Savannah and Cole. Their silence online became the loudest part of their downfall. By Sunday, the city had settled into its usual hum. I spent the morning arranging flowers for a wedding downtown, white roses and hydrangeas tied with silk ribbon. As I packed the delivery van, Lily handed me a cup of coffee. "You ever think about expanding?" she asked, glancing around the shop. "You've got the customers for it." I smiled. "Maybe someday." As I drove toward the venue, the streets shimmered with sunlight after the rain. The courthouse loomed briefly in the distance, its windows glinting like mirrors. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small when I looked at it. It wasn't the place where I'd been wronged anymore, it was where I had stood up. The wedding delivery went smoothly. The bride, a young woman with nervous hands, thanked me with tears in her eyes when she saw the arrangement. "It's perfect," she said. I told her congratulations, then stepped back into the warm afternoon air. The sound of laughter floated through the open doors behind me, light and effortless. Driving home, I passed the stretch of river that curved around the French Quarter. The sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the surface. It looked peaceful even after the storms that had swept through all week. Back at the shop, I left the door open to let in the breeze. The scent of fresh lilies filled the air again, soft and clean. On the counter sat a single unopened envelope from the court, a final copy of the judgment. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I placed it under the vase of daisies by the window and whispered to myself, "It's enough." Outside, the last light of day stretched long across the street. The fight was over, but life wasn't done unfolding. The world had gone back to its rhythm, slow, steady, and beautifully ordinary. And as the sky deepened into evening, I realized the next chapter wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about beginning again. The week after the verdict passed slowly, each day quieter than the one before. The phone stopped buzzing with updates, and the steady rhythm of the shop filled the silence. Customers returned, some curious, some simply kind, pretending not to know what had happened. Word had spread through the neighborhood, but people in New Orleans had a way of letting stories fade once the lesson was learned. Savannah and Cole disappeared from public view. Their social media accounts went private. Their business website vanished overnight, and the sign from their boutique on Royal Street came down within days. Only the empty windows remained, reflecting the gray of the early spring sky. I passed by once on my way to a supplier and paused for a moment in front of the boarded glass. A for-lease notice fluttered against the door, the tape peeling in the wind. I didn't linger. The morning after, a letter arrived from the court, official confirmation that restitution had been transferred to my account. I left the envelope unopened on my kitchen counter. Money couldn't fix what was broken, but it marked an ending I had waited years for. That afternoon, Lily stopped by with 2 cups of coffee and a nervous smile. "It's really over," she said, handing me one. Savannah's moving out of town. She and Cole are talking about selling the house. I nodded, unsure what to say. Dad? I asked. Lily hesitated before answering. He's embarrassed, she said finally. People know now. He keeps to himself. But I think he's starting to see what you've been trying to tell him all along. Her voice carried both relief and sadness. We sat on the back steps of the shop watching the late sunlight slant across the street. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Later that week, Daniel stopped by in person to close out the final paperwork. He was his usual calm self, dressed neatly in a pressed shirt, his briefcase tucked under one arm. Everything's finalized, he said, setting a folder on the counter. They can appeal if they want, but it won't change much. I thanked him, though the words felt small for everything he had done. You're stronger than you realize, he said before leaving. Don't forget that. That evening I went for a walk through Jackson Square. The air smelled faintly of rain and street food, the sound of a saxophone drifting from a corner near the cathedral. I bought a cup of coffee from a small stand and sat on a bench near the fountain. The water shimmered under the lights, each ripple catching the glow. It had been months since that dinner, yet I could still picture the look on Savannah's face when she threw that glass of wine, the same sharp smile that had once felt like power. Now it seemed hollow, distant like something from another lifetime. A few days later, I received a short email from Megan. She'd found a new job at a small marketing firm in Baton Rouge. Thank you, she wrote, for standing up when others couldn't. I read the message twice, then deleted it, not because it meant nothing, but because it meant enough. It was another quiet sign that the right people had found their way forward even after the wreckage. The next weekend, Lily showed up again, this time with a notebook full of sketches. I've been thinking, she said, spreading the pages across the counter. What if we expanded the shop? Add a small cafe corner? Maybe workshops for flower arranging? She looked up. Her eyes bright with a kind of hope I hadn't seen since we were kids. I smiled. Let's take it one step at a time, I said. But I like where your head's at. Over the following days, we made small changes. New shelving, a fresh coat of paint, a rearranged display by the window. The rhythm of the shop felt lighter with her around. Customers noticed, too. One morning, a regular named Mrs. Bernard came in and said, "It feels different in here. Happier." I laughed softly and told her she might be right. Meanwhile, whispers about Savannah's downfall continued to ripple through the business community. A friend from the market mentioned that Cole had been turned down for a new contract after the bank flagged his involvement in the case. Another vendor said Savannah had tried to pitch a rebrand under a new company name, but no one wanted to back her. It wasn't vengeance, it was consequence. The world had simply moved on, leaving her where her choices had placed her. As for my father, his silence lasted until one quiet afternoon. The phone rang while I was restocking vases, and his name appeared on the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Marin," he said, his voice slower than I remembered. "I read the article about your shop. You've done well." I didn't know what to say. The words were ordinary, but the tone was different. No condescension, no pride, just recognition. "Thank you," I said softly. There was a pause. Then he added, "I should have believed you. I thought I was helping your sister, but I see now I was just feeding her pride." His voice wavered slightly before he cleared his throat. "I'm sorry." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was release. "I hope you're taking care of yourself," he said finally. "I am," I answered. "I really am." When the call ended, I stood still for a moment, letting the sound of it settle. It wasn't forgiveness that filled the air. It was something quieter, something enough. The next morning, I opened the shop early. The sunlight caught the fresh blooms we'd arranged the night before, roses, tulips, and snapdragons, their colors soft and full. Lily arrived with 2 coffees and a stack of invoices. We worked side by side, the quiet hum of the cooler and the faint sound of traffic outside, wrapping around us like a rhythm we both understood. Around noon, a man stepped inside a reporter from the local business journal. "I'm writing a follow-up piece," he said, holding his notepad, "about recovery and resilience after loss. Would you be willing to talk?" I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. We sat at one of the small tables near the window as he asked questions about rebuilding, about family, about what comes next. I kept my answers simple. "It's not about winning," I said. "It's about learning where to stand." When he left, Lily turned to me smiling. "That's the first time you've talked about all of this without flinching," she said. I laughed quietly. Maybe that's what healing sounds like. By evening, the sun dipped low over the rooftops, casting a golden haze across the shop floor. I watered the last of the lilies, their scent filling the air as I turned off the lights. Outside, the street was alive again. Children on bikes, couples walking hand in hand, the world turning as it always had. As I locked the door, I caught my reflection in the window, tired but peaceful, the faint trace of a smile, where once there had been doubt. The fight that began with humiliation had ended with something stronger than pride. It had brought balance, not revenge. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Lily to plan the next steps for the shop. There was work to do, new beginnings to build, and a quiet certainty that the worst had passed. The story that once began with loss was finally turning into something else, something whole. And as I walked home through the fading light, the city around me alive and forgiving, I realized that peace doesn't arrive all at once. It grows quietly like flowers after a storm, steady and sure, one bloom at a time. The weeks that followed felt like stepping into a new season. The city warmed, the magnolias bloomed again, and for the first time in a long while, my life didn't feel like something I had to defend. The lawsuit, the noise, the years of keeping my head down, all of it had gone quiet. What remained was something simpler: peace. Lily and I finished the renovations in the shop, the new layout bright and open. We hung string lights above the counter and built a small seating nook near the window where customers could linger with coffee or conversation. On the day we reopened, fully people filled the space like sunlight, neighbors, regulars, and even a few new faces drawn in by the scent of fresh blooms. I watched them move through the aisles, touching petals and smiling, and thought how different this place felt from the one that had once been vandalized and broken. It wasn't just repaired, it was reborn. A week later, my father came by unannounced. He stood at the door for a long moment before stepping inside, looking older, somehow softer. "You've made something beautiful here," he said. His voice carried no judgment this time, only quiet awe. I wiped my hands on my apron and nodded, unsure how to respond. I didn't see things clearly before he continued. "I thought success meant loudness, but I was wrong." He hesitated, his eyes glancing at the rows of flowers. "I'm proud of you, Marin." The words landed gently, almost fragile, but they stayed. I told him about Lily's new ideas for expanding the business and how we'd begun teaching small evening workshops for beginners. He smiled faintly. "Your mother would have liked that," he said, and for the first time in years, her memory hung between us without pain. We talked a while longer before he left, and when the door closed behind him, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't full reconciliation, but it was a beginning. As for Savannah, I didn't hear from her again. Through Lily, I learned she and Cole had sold the house and moved to Austin. No apologies, no explanations, just distance. Maybe that was her way of accepting the consequences, or maybe she still blamed everyone but herself. Either way, I'd stopped waiting for her acknowledgement. I didn't need it anymore. One quiet evening after closing, Lily and I sat on the back steps of the shop. The air smelled of jasmine and rain, and the sky was streaked in pink and gold. She nudged my shoulder lightly. "You ever think about how different things are now?" she asked. "Sometimes it feels like we're finally living instead of surviving." I smiled at that. "Yeah," I said, "it does." The truth was everything that once felt like loss had turned into space room, to grow, to rebuild, to breathe again. The lawsuit hadn't just restored my business. It restored my self-worth, the kind that can't be bought or handed down. I'd spent years believing that love had to be earned through sacrifice, that being quiet made me kind. But silence had only protected the people who caused harm. Standing up hadn't made me bitter, it had made me whole. That realization came into sharper focus one morning when an older customer named Mrs. Bernard stopped by. She'd been coming to my shop since I first opened. "You've changed," she said, adjusting her hat as she studied me. Not your smile, the way you carry yourself. There's peace in you now." I laughed softly, handing her a small bundle of white tulips. "Took me a while to find it," I said. She nodded knowingly. "All good things take their time." As the months passed, the shop flourished. Word of mouth traveled through the French Quarter, and we started taking orders for weddings, galas, and charity events. Each arrangement felt like a small victory, a reminder that I hadn't just survived the storm, I'd learned to grow through it. Lily found her rhythm too, handling suppliers and marketing with a confidence that surprised even her. We worked hard, but laughed more, the air filled with the sound of scissors clipping stems and music playing low from the radio. Sometimes when I stayed late after closing, I'd look at the reflection in the window, the same glass that had once been shattered, and think about the woman who walked away from that dinner months ago, wine dripping from her dress heart, pounding with humiliation. I barely recognized her now. She'd been scared and unsure, convinced that love meant staying small. But she'd learned that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors you choose who to open for. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe Savannah would reach out someday, or maybe she wouldn't. Maybe my father and I would find our way back completely, or maybe our relationship would stay like this, gentle but cautious. What I did know was that I had built something lasting, something grounded in truth. My shop, my peace, my life, they were mine. As the city lights flickered on and the hum of evening filled the air, I stood by the window, the smell of fresh lilies surrounding me, and whispered a quiet thank you to the woman I used to be for not giving up when it would have been easier to stay silent. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, I hope this story reminds you that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's survival, and sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do. Thank you for listening. If this story found a place in your heart, share it with someone who might need a little courage tonight, and remember, even after the hardest storms, something beautiful can still bloom.